Hi friends, welcome to my YouTube channel on the past perfect tense. In this video we will discuss about the past perfect tense, one of the advanced tenses. What is the past perfect tense? The past perfect is used to express an action which was completed before another action or time in the past. The past perfect talks that one action was completely finished before another action happened in the past. Let's look at diagram. The action is started and finished before another action happened. For example, we had already had breakfast before my father arrived. The action of having breakfast in this sentence was completely finished before the action of arriving happened. We had already had breakfast before my father arrived. We had breakfast at 7:30 and my father arrived at 8. Or by the time we arrived, the class had started. When we arrived in the class, the teacher was teaching because the class had already started before we arrived or by the time we arrived. Or John had left before you came. Your friends ask you, "Where's John?" You say, "John had left before you came." The action leaving happened and completed before the action of coming. John had left before you came. Or the people had seized the thief before the police arrived. The action of seizing happened and completed before arriving. When the police arrived, the people had already seized the thief. Or before the police arrived, the people had seized the thief, etc. Let's move on. Words and expressions that are used in the past perfect tense. For example, before she graduated from university, she had already learned English. Here, the word already is an expression that is used in the past perfect tense. Already means that an action was completed, was finished in the past. Before she graduated from university, what had she done? She had already learned English. She had learned English. Or by the time he moved to Canada, he had been an English teacher for 3 years. For is used to show a period of time. How long? How long had he been an English teacher before he moved to Canada? You can say, by the time he moved to Canada, he had been an English teacher for 3 years. How long? For 3 years. We had just slept when you called us. The word just is used to emphasize that an action finished just a short moment ago. We had just slept when you called us. Or when you left the home, your father hadn't come yet. When you left the home, your father was not at home because your father hadn't come yet. Or I had taught English since 2014. Since is used to show point in a time when an action happened. When the action of teaching happened, it happened in 2014. And that's over. And Right now I don't teach English. Right now I'm a doctor. I am a math teacher. I teach math. But I had taught English since 2014. Or they had never watched TV before they moved to the city. Before they moved to the city, they had not watched TV at all. When they moved to the city, they started to watch TV. Subjects that are used in the past perfect tense are I, we, you, they, he, she, it. Helping verb. The helping verb is had, which is used with all the subjects. The main verbs are used in the past participle or the third form of the verb. For example, walked, eaten, broken, spoken, studied, written, etc. Main structure. The main structure is subject plus had plus main verb plus object or complement. Let's make some examples using this structure. For example, positive subjects plus helping verb had plus main verb, the third form of the verb, plus object. I had cooked food, we had cooked food, you had cooked food, they had cooked food, he had cooked food, she had cooked food, and it had cooked food. Let's look at some more examples. They had painted the wall when I came home. Or the students had cheated before the teacher saw them. Negative. Subject plus had not plus the third form of the verb plus food. I had not cooked food. We had not cooked food. You had not cooked food. They had not cooked food. He had not cooked food. She had not cooked food. It had not cooked food. Let's look at some more examples. They had not painted the wall when I came home is the negative form of they had painted the wall when I came home. The students had not cheated before the teacher saw them is the negative form of the students had cheated before the teacher saw them. Let's move on. Interrogative. In interrogative sentences, the helping verb had comes at the beginning of the sentence. For example, had plus subject plus main verb plus object. Had I cooked food? Had we cooked food? Had you cooked food? Had they cooked food? Had he cooked food? Had she cooked food? Had it cooked food? Let's look at some more examples. Had they painted the wall when I came home? Or had the students cheated before the teacher saw them? Etc. Let's move on. How to make contraction in the past perfect tense. We use contraction because it is easier and faster to say. When we are in a conversation, we use contraction. Or when we are writing informally, we can use contraction. But we cannot use contraction in formal writing or in academic writing. For example, positive contractions are I had becomes I'd. We contract had with pronouns. I had becomes I'd. We cancel H and A and put an apostrophe, and then we join helping verb and I together. I had becomes I'd. We had becomes with. You had becomes you'd. They had becomes they'd. He had becomes he'd. She had becomes she'd. And it cannot be contracted in positive form. It had becomes it had. It cannot be contracted. It is very informal to contract that. Let's look at some examples. They won the match before you arrived. You'd already left when I had breakfast. He'd found his car's case. We'd sold our house before we moved to Canada. She'd broken her leg. Bet. I'd, we'd, you'd, they'd, he'd, she'd can be the contraction form of I had bought a new computer and I would help you. So how do you know the difference? When I'd followed by the third form of the verb, that is the past perfect tense, I'd, for example, I'd bought a new computer, that is a past perfect tense. If I'd followed by the base form of the verb, you can simply figure out that I'd is the contraction form of I would. I'd help you, or I would help you. Let's move on. Negative contractions. I had not becomes I hadn't. Here in negative contraction, we contract had with adverb not. I had not becomes I hadn't. We dropped O of adverb not, and then we add an apostrophe, and finally we join helping verb with adverb not. I had not becomes I hadn't. We had not becomes we hadn't. You had not becomes you hadn't. They had not becomes they hadn't. He had not becomes he hadn't. She had not becomes she hadn't. It had not becomes it hadn't. Let's look at some examples. They hadn't won the match before you arrived. You hadn't left when I had breakfast. He hadn't found his car's case. We hadn't watched that movie. It hadn't broken the window. I hadn't taught English yet. That's it. Let's move on. Regular and irregular verbs. In the past perfect tense, we need to know regular and irregular verbs because we use the third form of the verb. And if we know regular and irregular verbs, we can easily understand how to use the third form of the verb or the past simple form of the verb. Let's look at regular verbs. Regular verbs are those verbs that form the past simple and the past participle or the third form by adding d, ed, or ied to the base form of the verbs. For example, walk becomes walked, study becomes studied, organize becomes organized. The second and the third form are the same or similar. Study becomes studied. It can be the second and the third form. Organize becomes organized. It can be the second or the third form. Let's look at irregular verbs. Irregular verbs are those verbs that do not have any specific role. You cannot add ded or ied to the verb in order to change the form of the verb. Not, it does not have any specific role. But we can change or we can restyle the form of the verb to create the past simple and the past participle. We change the spelling, okay? For example, sing, sang, sang. The first form of the verb is sing, the second form of the verb is sang, and the third form or the past participle form of the verb is sang. See, the spellings are different. Sing, S-I-N-G, S, the second form is A-N-G, and the third form is U-N-G. The spellings are different. Or eat, ate, eaten. Write, wrote, written. Send, sent, sent. There are some types of irregular verbs that their past simple and the past participle are the same. For example, send, send, sent. And there are some irregular verbs that the base form, the past participle, the past simple are the same. We do not change, we do not restyle the base form of the verb. The second, the third, the first form of the verb are similar in terms of spelling. Let's move on. Rules of adding d, ed, or ied. Regular verbs. Most verbs simply take ed. For example, want becomes wanted. It can be the second form of the verb or the third form of the verb. Want becomes wanted. Call becomes called. Select becomes selected. Clean becomes cleaned. Look becomes looked, etc. Verbs ending in e take only d. For example, organize becomes organized. The verb ends in e. First we dropped the e and then we added d. Organize becomes organized. Arrange becomes arranged. Hope becomes hoped. Hope becomes hoped. Ignore becomes ignored. Realize becomes realized, etc. Verbs ending in consonant plus y, first drop the y and then add ied. For example, cry becomes cried. The verb cry ends in consonant plus y. First we drop the I and then we add ied. Cry becomes cried. In the second or the third form, we do not have y. We drop the I and then we add ied. Try becomes tried. Fry becomes fried. Marry becomes married. Carry becomes carried, etc. One-syllable verbs ending in CVC letters double the last letter and then add ed. CVC letters are consonant plus vowel plus consonant. For example, stop becomes stopped. The verb stop ends in consonant T, vowel O, consonant P. First we double the last letter and then we add ed. Stop becomes stop. Stopped has double P. Plan becomes planned. Slim becomes slimmed. Admit becomes admitted. Wrap becomes wrapped, etc. Let's move on. Some irregular verbs. There are some irregular verbs, okay? For example, sing, sang, sang. The base form of the verb, sing. The second form of the verb or the past simple form of the verb, sang. And the third form of the verb or the past participle form of the verb is sang. The spellings are different. Draw, drew, drawn. speak, spoke, spoken, through, thrown, go, went, gone, bring, brought, brought. And there are some types of irregular verbs that their second and third forms of them are the same. For example, bring, brought, brought, bring, brought, brought, or buy, bought, bought, meet, made, made, build, built, built, send, sent, sent. And there are some types of irregular verbs that their second, third, and the base forms of them are similar. For example, put, put, put. We do not change the spelling of the verb. The spelling is the same and the meaning is different. Put, put, put. Hate, hate, hates. Cat, cat, cat. Read, rate, rates. Spread, spread, spread. Go, went, gone. Get, got, gotten. Keep, kept, kept. See, saw, seen. Give, gave, given, etc. Let's move on. Short answers in the past perfect tense. There is a mistake here. It is not the present perfect tense, but it is the past perfect tense because we are talking about the past perfect tense. When someone asks you a question, you don't need to use a long sentence or repeat the whole question to answer his or her question. You can give a short answer. For example, if the questions start with had, you can answer them with either had or hadn't. Let's look at some examples to figure out the questions, the short answers. If someone asks you, had you had lunch? If you had lunch, you can say, yes, I had, or no, I hadn't. You don't need to say, yes, I had lunch. You can simply say, yes, I had, or no, I hadn't. Had she taken the test? Yes, she had, or no, she hadn't. Had he finished his work? Yes, he had, or no, he hadn't. Had John finished the report? Yes, he had, or no, he hadn't. Had they informed their clients? Yes, they had, or no, they hadn't. Had it happened before? Yes, it had, or no, it hadn't. That's it. Let's move on. Some more examples. She had been a teacher for 5 years, the positive form. She had not been a teacher for 5 years, the negative form. And had she been a teacher for 5 years, or they had met me 5 times. They had not met me 5 times. Had they met me 5 times? The police had arrested the thief. The police had not arrested the thief. Had the police arrested the thief? Etc. WH question in the past perfect tenses. For example, what had she had for lunch? Where had you studied English? How long had you been in Japan? Who had won the match? Why had they left the class before the teacher came? Or whom had he met before he moved to Italy? Etc. Thanks for watching this video. If you enjoyed this video, please like this video and subscribe to my YouTube channel if you haven't already. And make sure to click that small bell so that you know when I publish a new English video, a new English lesson here on YouTube.